I've basically been arguing for the past 20 years or so, maybe 15 years, is that games present the past. Historical games present history in very special ways. And I call the way that they present them a historical problem space. And I call the way that I kind of suggest people study historical games the historical problem space framework. Sounds really fancy. It's actually really simple. I don't think, and please send me an email or a note if I'm mistaken, I don't think you can find a single historical game that doesn't present its historical material as some kind of player agent, so a player that takes on a role, having some kind of goals that have been given to them by the game designers, and they get to make what I call action choices. I call them action choices because you choose to do it and then you act upon it in a game. And every historical game, every computer game, every board game, every interactive text game, if they're designed around history, they're going to be a historical problem space. Now, if you think about it for a second, that's kind of makes sense. You might think, well, yeah, history is really like that. And of course, in ancient history, we often spend lots of time talking about people with goals and they make choices. But remember, the past itself is a very confusing and complex thing, just like our own lives. And we're not always clear what our goals are. We're not always clear what our choices are. We're not always trying to achieve anything in particular. So this idea that when you play a historical game, it's going to always turn it into an agent with goals, and they're trying to achieve those goals. So this is just a complex way of looking at that. I've written plenty on it, and you can go to my website, gamingthepast.net, and you can find more details on this. Or please feel free to send me an email or be on Blue Sky or something like that. Anyways, so you got this historical problem space framework, and basically the framework is a set of vocab and a set of relationships to try and express how games work. Now, a couple of things that I think are really, really important here when we're understanding a historical problem space is because so computer games absolutely do this all the time. They are functional, and when I say functional, I mean, it has to be turned into computer code. There have to be zeros and ones, and each part of the game has to work with the others. So that's what I mean by functional, okay? It has to be what we call cohesive, has to stick together. A good game isn't going to focus on thousands of different things. It's going to focus on a small number of things. And most people think that games that are cohesive, that stick together, are better than games that are spread out. Okay, so those parts of the historical problem space that you can see in this chart, player agent, goals, agents, resources, they have to fit together in a computer game. They're in a good game design, in a good computer game design, nothing in the game is designed mechanically that doesn't interlock and fit with the rest of the parts of the game. That's what I mean by functional. So when you're looking at a game about history, it's really important when you look at the different parts and how the game presents things to say, how does that fit in with the other parts of the historical problem space? Why did they design the player agent this way or as opposed to that way? Now, the other thing I want you to think about is all of these features of a historical problem space, player agent, game goals, action choices, and so on, are heavily, heavily, heavily influenced by genre, by game genre. And one genre game, in this case, Assassin's Creed Odyssey, what we would call probably a third-person action-adventure game, portrays the 5th century Greek past very differently from Hegemony, Wars of Ancient Greece, which is on my other side there, which is a real-time strategy game. So those genres very much dictate, control, shape, influence how the games present the past. And that's what I want to talk with you about today by comparing and contrasting the two and looking at how the designer's design choices really shape the history. The reason I picked these is because they're both about, well, so I should stop. I wrote an article about this in 24. And the reason I picked these two is because they both, in a sense, have the same, what we might call historical content. They're both about the same kind of area and place of history. 5th century Greece in the first phase of the Archidamian War, first phase of the Peloponnesian War. So both of them talk about this, but that's kind of where the similarity ends, because they do so in very, very different ways. Okay, so let me introduce our games. I put that chart in the back, not so you'd read it, but so that you'd see that one can do a historical problem space diagram and in great detail talk about the different parts of the game and how they fit together. I'm just going to give you an overview in case you haven't played the game. Assassin's Creed Odyssey, right? A third-person action-adventure game. I played through as Cassandra. Cassandra is supposed to be canonical. That's why I did. Plus, she's really, really cool. And so as Cassandra, you talk to people in the past. You wander around a three-dimensional world that is meant to be as realistic as possible. You climb things, jump from things, and you kill lots and lots of people. So we've got pictures here, right? Cassandra doing dialogue, talking with a figure. Cassandra climbing up an outpost. We'll get back to that later. And Cassandra fighting, you can barely see her. She's in the background as the hoplite in front of her is being stabbed by her. This is Cassandra in a battle of the Peloponnesian War. And I don't know if you'll see this already, but that picture there doesn't look like any battle of the Peloponnesian War we have any evidence for. Okay, so that's Assassin's Creed Odyssey, third-person action-adventure game. Hegemony, Wars of Ancient Greece, you may not have heard of. I think Vladimir's played it. Didn't you say you had? Yeah. It's probably about 13 years old, I think. It's a real-time strategy. So if you think about Age of Empires, the Age of Empires series, I think that's probably the most famous real-time strategy these days. Maybe StarCraft if you're playing competitive sports. Anyway, real-time strategy game. In this game, you are the Athenian state. That's basically the best word for you. You're the state. You control units as they get made. You control where those military units go. You control supply systems. You control how much food you're bringing in and where you're going to send that food. So you're really kind of like the state, because you're making decisions that historically would be made by a state. They're beyond any one person to make those decisions, okay? And so the history they present is very different. And as you can see in the top picture there, this is, so neither game models specific Peloponnesian War battles. Neither of them claims, okay, I'm going to do the battle of, gosh, now I can't remember a Peloponnesian War battle, Tegea, and this is how I'm going to show it. Instead, they have games about this period that show battles. So if you look at that top picture, that's one of the battles in Hegemony Wars of Ancient Greece. And I'll just go back one second. Very different from that top picture about Cassandra fighting a battle in the Peloponnesian War. But they're both saying this is 5th century Greece, Athenians and Spartans fighting. Okay, so as I suggested before, historical games are designed as historical problem spaces. I'm just going to run through the features slowly because I think it'll be helpful. You've got your player agent. Player agent is almost exactly the same as a player, except for one important thing. In historical games, you take on a role. You act as somebody. That's the agent you are acting as. I should probably also define agent here. Agent, very simple. I simply mean anyone who can make choices to achieve goals, right? In the historical world, we know right? Because we are hopefully modern, enlightened students of ancient history, that every human being should have agency, and that it is so important that we support and defend everybody's right to make choices in their lives. So that's why I use the word agent in the game, because I want to illustrate the fact that we're talking about a person that can and probably should get to make choices. Okay, game goals. Now, you probably know this as a player. You can play any way you want. You can throw the controller around. You can try to lose to your friend. You can just walk around one place over and over. Player agent does not have to follow the game goals. But the game goals are what the designers designed, hoping that you would try to pursue them. So they're a really important part of the game's history, because they basically tell you what the player agent should focus on. And it might make a big difference whether you're focusing on giving candy to children in a class or going out and conquering an empire. These are very different goals and would have very different outcomes. Okay, action choices I mentioned before, the things that you can choose to do to get your goals. All of this takes place in a game world. There is every historical game I've ever seen has a game world. It may be well developed, it may be very lightly developed, but it's going to contain everything. The player agent, the goals, the actions they can take, all take place in the game world. And then in the game world, there's 4, I call them elements. It's the stuff in the game world. Agents, non-player agents. And again, I use that term. Oftentimes we look at computer games, and board games do this too, by the way. Non-player agents are often treated like they're not real people. They're often treated just to be used by the player agent as a resource or a tool or something like that. That's why I call them agents, to remind us, hey, these peasants that they're showing in the video games, historically, they're human beings. They should have agency, but they're kind of treated in the game like they don't. Okay, agents, resources, which I define simply as things you can collect and spend. Tools, you can use them to get something else you want. And obstacles are things that are simply in your way. True obstacles don't compete with you, they just stop you. Okay, so those are the parts of a game, and every historical game does this, whether it's a board game or a video game. So let's go into it. All right, now if we're looking at player agents, we've got very different player agents, and that's because of the different genres that make the different problem spaces. Cassandra, right? Third-person action adventure. In theory, she is said to be a 5th century mercenary fighting. In practice, there is no 5th century mercenary in the world that was like Cassandra. On Hegemony Gold, or Hegemony Wars of Ancient Greece, you've got an all-powerful god figure. You don't actually see the character. We're going to look at that in a little bit. But this person, this agent controls everything about the Athenians that's part of the war game. Food supplies, and where to move, and where to fight, and what kind of units to produce, and how to fight with them, all of that. And so they're basically an all-powerful god. And I question these because neither of them is giving you a particularly historical agent as we think of it. It's a little more complicated than that, as we'll get to, but that's what I wanted us to start with. Okay, so Assassin's Creed Odyssey. Your player agent, think how different she is. And by the way, if you've played any third-person agent or third-person action adventure game, you're fine. Grand Theft Auto, Red Dead Redemption, any of the Assassin's Creeds, Mafia, whatever, right? We know what these games are like. Now, here's some features. First of all, the player agent's an individual. She's represented as one human being in the game world. Second, she has an avatar, okay? She has some character representing her in space, okay? Now, look at what comes from that. by choosing to have an individual with an avatar, okay, they have chosen to make the game about a person, about an individual. And the whole rest of the game follows around that. Her powers, even though they're sometimes superhuman, are all focused on her. She can kill. She can kill quietly. She can kill openly. She can talk to people. And probably the most important thing for the actual history, she can witness. She can look at things and see things in the world that she's around. Okay? So Cassandra is very much a personal agent for a third-person action-adventure game, because these games focus on an avatar agent wandering around some kind of environment, doing some kind of interaction, talking with different figures, and fighting and killing. Those are mostly what people do in third-person action-adventure games. So this sounds obvious, but I want you to really think about it. Cassandra is a perfect player agent for a third-person action-adventure game. We could go a little further. We might also, instead of game genre, third-person action-adventure, we might also talk about brand genre. What I mean by that is Assassin's Creed has its own genre. It's partly third-person action-adventure, but there's lots of things in Assassin's Creed that are more specific to it. Stealth, parkour, right? The ability to climb up over buildings and swing from them and jump from them and things like that. So Cassandra is not just a third-person action-adventure player agent. She's an Assassin's Creed player agent. Okay, now let's look at Hegemony in contrast. Hegemony is a real-time strategy game. We would probably call the player agent, I would probably call the player agent a collective. All I mean by that is the player agent is a group of people. Like I said before, there is no single person in the Athenian state historically. There's no single person in any state who could make all of these decisions for all of these people, okay? But in the game, you do. Now, notice there's no avatar. And you might say, well, yeah, that's obvious. It's a real-time strategy game. Exactly. That's what I'm saying. They designed it as a real-time strategy game, so there's not going to be an avatar. But notice, we're going to have a different history then if we have one about a player agent you can see and listen to, and one about a player agent that you don't see, and you just see their arrow, their cursor clicking on things. So they make units, they manage cities, they command units, they don't talk to anybody, they don't go around architectural worlds, 3D architectures of Athens and things like that. They're a very different player agent. Okay. Now, as I said, Cassandra is a functional Assassin's Creed third-player adventure or third-person adventure genre player agent. Witnessing, that's what people do in third-person historical games. That's what people do in Assassin's Creed. And let me talk about this for a second. I have a confession. My confession is when I first started researching historical games as historical problem spaces, I started with strategy games like Civilization, just because I liked them better at the time. And so for a long time, I would take games like Assassin's Creed and go, what is this? This is a stealth assassin with almost superhuman powers, single-handedly controlling the fate of the world she's in and doing things that no historical person did. I mean, there were people killing each other, obviously. It was a war. I don't know, probably there were assassins. I don't think we have any testimony, but sure. But nobody like Cassandra. So I used to go, well, this isn't really a historical game. But I've been thinking a long time about this, 20 years. And I realized that there's a really important action choice that an Assassin's Creed player agent has: witnessing. And that is critical, because what's going on there is the game is saying, it's claiming, if you were a person in this place, this is the stuff you would see. These are the kinds of conversations you might have. Here is what you would observe. And that historically is a very important statement. But you just have to remember that that's the primary historical connection in Assassin's Creed, witnessing the world around, not the assassinations, not the Peloponnesian War, things like that. Okay, now, the Athenian state is also a functional player agent, but this time for a real-time strategy genre player problem space. No avatar, state agent, an experimenting god. The term that I have been using over the years is experimenting deity, and a deity is just a god. If you didn't pick that up in your studies, and so an experimenting god. Think about it. In real-time strategies, you can say, I wonder what happened if I took this agent and threw them into this battle. Oh, they all died. Okay, I guess I won't do that next time. I wonder what would happen if I stopped feeding the people in this city. Oh, the city shrank. Now, so right, you're making horrific choices that, right, in the world have horrific consequences for people, and you don't care because you're just trying it out. That's why I call it an experimenting deity. And Civilization is like this. Every real-time strategy is like this. All strategy games that involve you taking units and moving them around. Okay, so the Athenian state, also very functional for a real-time strategy. Now, here's a thought. What if you exchanged the player agents? What if you kept the games completely running as they do, operating the way they do, and you put a real-time strategy player agent into Assassin's Creed, and you took the Assassin's Creed player agent and put it into the real-time strategy? Silly, in a sense, right? Because my point is very basic. In some levels, the genre shapes the historical problem space, which shapes how the game presents history. So you probably would never do that. Who would take a real-time strategy game and design it and then say, you know what we need? We need an avatar individual player agent that can do individual things. Nobody would say, create a third-person action adventure and say, you know what we need? We need a player agent that doesn't exist in the world, just clicks on things. How do you stealthily sneak up on somebody if you have no body? There's no stealth. So this is why it's a really important point. Okay, now there have been some attempts. I mean, I'm 53, so I've been playing video games since they started, and there used to be attempts to try and make strategy games where you could zoom in and play as one player and then zoom out. So there are exceptions. However, with these two, if you put a real-time strategy avatar, or excuse me, not avatar, real-time strategy player agent into Assassin's Creed, no more stealth, no more individual powers, no more commanding and controlling except for individuals, because there wouldn't be any units in the Assassin's Creed Odyssey game. And there would be all of this useless code in there that didn't work. Let me show you the other way. If you put Cassandra in a real-time strategy game like Hegemony, how does she command units? She can't click on them because there is no cursor representing her. She is an agent. How is she supposed to? And let me go back. If you look at this map right here in the bottom right, this map is the zoom out feature in Hegemony, and you can click and order any of those things or zoom right in to the battlefield. How's Cassandra going to go order those troops? Is she going to have to run down to Corinth to direct the siege and then run back to Athens? It doesn't make sense. It makes sense for a game that's about units and command to have something that is a collective, a group. Okay. Here's another thing to think about. If you put a real-time strategy player agent into Assassin's Creed Odyssey, what's all that code doing in there that's left over for how to climb buildings and whether things have handholds or not? right? Third-person adventures have, especially Assassin's Creed, have developed and detailed code for handholds and footholds, and where can you swing, and can you lift yourself up, and will you survive this fall? All of that becomes useless if you don't have an avatar. Okay? So again, it's kind of silly, but it's an interesting thought experiment, and I want you to get the same conclusion. These game developers did not make histories of the 5th century, or even game histories, because games are histories of the 5th century. Instead, one made an Assassin's Creed history of the 5th century, and one made a hegemony history, game history. Okay, geography. I was just talking about this, right? Third-person action-adventure games, mostly, if you're talking about the ones that Rockstar makes and the ones that Ubisoft makes, are about realism, right? They're about trying to give a world that looks and sounds like it did in the past. Now, let's be really careful here. At no point in any of this have I really been spending a lot of time talking about historical accuracy. Accuracy is a tough term when you're looking at video games. Because strictly speaking, what would it mean for a game to be accurate? Think about that for a second. Let me give you an example. Let's take this statement, okay? I was born in 1972 in Chicago. Okay, I was born in 1972 in Chicago. And you can make the same statement about yourself, right? Think about it for a second, saying, I was born wherever you were born in whatever year you were born. Okay, and we might say that's a historically accurate statement. Except, ask your mother. It was much more complicated than that. There was a lot more going on to produce you as a living human being than just a sentence saying, I was born on such and such a day, right? So even simple things like that we say, that's historically accurate. Well, it depends on what you mean. So I don't spend a lot of time on this. The reason I'm bringing it up now, however, is because the realism, we have to remember, the realism that they show is an argument. Adam Chapman is very famous for talking about this in his work, that this is a style of presentation that invites the player to say, wow, that's what it looked like. And it's not always true that it looked like that. Ubisoft puts a lot of energy into their designs and using evidence and bringing on historians. But think about it. They simulated an entire Athens. We don't have most of the buildings from Athens, right? We have a few remains from the 5th century. So there is no way that they completely represented completely the same way as it was 5th century Athens. Okay, but you got this realism. Now, here's a thing to remember. The realism itself is not a third-person adventure thing. If you've ever kind of investigated how games get designed, three-dimensional games like this have a procedure called gray boxing, where they, instead of having the characters, the animated figures and everything like that in the game, when it's really early on, they just use gray boxes, rectangles and boxes, to move around on screen so they can put the art in later. So the killing, the climbing, the jumping, none of that needs a detailed simulation of 5th century Greece. But this is where the brand genre comes in. Assassin's Creed makes its money in part by saying, we are showing you what it looked like. And so sometimes the reasons for things in a game are not part of the game mechanics at all. They're a part of other things, like aesthetics, like beauty, like claims about history. Okay, so realism. Now, the things that are shaping that realism, one of them is the evidence that's available, but the other one is they were designed for a Cassandra to use as her playground, to climb up and jump over and everything like that. So there are historical problem space, functional game systems that depend on creating an architecture that satisfies climbing and jumping and running and so on. Now, hegemony is based on what I would call more functionality. Careful there, because Assassin's Creed is also based on functionality. It's just a different function that it's trying to do. The functionality in hegemony is moving units, showing where the different cities are, showing whether soldiers are fighting well or not fighting well. It is not based on realistically presenting anything involving 5th century Greek architecture. And I like these pictures that I gave you. Look at the temple in Assassin's Creed Odyssey and look at the depiction of Athens in Hegemony, right? Cassandra can't run around the Hegemony depiction of Athens. There's not, I mean, you can't, there are no streets, there are no roads. You click on it with a single mouse button and give it commands. Hegemony would be lost in this temple because there's no soldiers and you can't direct them, and and you're not inside a city and you'd have to walk around. Anyway, the geographies themselves change based on the historical problem space. All right. Now, let's think about two really standout issues between Hegemony and Assassin's Creed Odyssey. Let's think about non-player agents. So those are the characters in the game that the player does not control. And peasants in particular, and agriculture. Now, Assassin's Creed focuses on being able to push, assault, and murder peasants. Hegemony focuses on managing and allowing peasants to farm. And that is very different. And you can see in the bottom picture, that little green circle in Hegemony is a farm. And that farm is supplying Athens. And in the screen above, that's Cassandra going through the wheat field. It's very creepy because when she goes through, I said it one day, I was like, I wonder if I can hit that peasant. Now, for those of you who have played a lot of Assassin's Creed, the ability to murder anybody you want was an Assassin's Creed Odyssey experiment. And they took it away in Valhalla, but I think maybe they put it back in Mirage. Somebody was saying, I don't know. Anybody play Mirage? Okay, me neither. So this is not always an Assassin's Creed genre thing. They kind of experimented with this because I went back to some earlier ones, and you can't harm people that aren't part of the plot. An interesting debate, isn't it? Whether we should be simulating the ability to kill people that aren't part of that haven't done anything, but video games do that a lot. I don't have a solution for it. Okay, but here's the point. The way that you can treat peasants in Assassin's Creed is very much a third-person action adventure and an Assassin's Creed way, okay? Those peasants, now, here I want to kind of bring up two terms, and hopefully they're not too hard for me to bring up. Representation and simulation. All I mean by that is representation is when there is a picture of something, an appearance of something, a surface of something. Simulation is when there is an actual underlying system that is doing things. I'm not the first person who came up with this. I believe Gonzalo Frasca was one of the earliest ones. In 2003, he wrote an article on this. And I think this idea of representation versus simulation is a lot of what's going on in a sense. So Assassin's Creed, the peasants in their farming jobs are simply representations. You watch them farm, but there is no food. Food is not coded into the game, certainly not the wheat that they are harvesting. You see them, as I said, work the ground, but there is no field land that's being simulated there. It's simply a picture, a representation, okay? So you can hear them, but you can't talk to them. Again, more representation. Sometimes you can talk to them if they're a quest giver. Okay, so agriculture and peasants is represented in Assassin's Creed, not simulated. But look at what is simulated in Assassin's Creed: murder and assault. The peasants do have three-dimensional bodies in the game. The peasants are controlled by physics models that allow you to strike. And when you strike them, they cry. It's horrible. they cry out and they run away. And you would have to chase them down if you wanted to keep assaulting them. So it's not fair to say that Assassin's Creed only represents peasants and peasants. It's just that the parts it represents about peasants are bodies in space that you can assault. That's third-person action-adventure games, right? That's what they do. Hegemony, they don't even show peasants. I'm a little sad because you can actually take control of enslaved people through battles, through war. But there are no peasants. There are farms. And basically those farms, now let's take the farm as our peasant. There's no peasants. I think they should have put them in. But you know why they didn't? They didn't need the actual peasant. What they needed was a model for a real-time strategy game about units. So food is a critical resource in the problem space of hegemony. If a unit runs out of food, well, first of all, food is supplied by connections between farms and cities. You see one of them there with a line in the picture. And then the units have to be close enough to cities to gain food. And when they move away from cities, they run out of food. And food is a specific resource. If a unit in battle, a group of hoplites say, runs out of food, then they are unable to fight anymore. They will be routed. Their morale will be shattered. So food is a resource that is actually simulated. And I say simulated because it is a thing that it is a resource that is given to a city that is then distributed to to a unit who then eats it, and then it has to go back from the farm to deliver it. It's a system. It's working parts. Okay? So in this case, you have a simulation of farm and agriculture, but that fits because the focus of the game is on these individual units battling each other. And so anything you put in the game, this goes back to my words, is it functional? Okay? Is it cohesive? And a farm, it can be burned, it can be restored, it can be connected to cities, it produces actual food, and none of that happens in Assassin's Creed Odyssey. But other than destroying the farms in Hegemony, there are no peasants and there's nobody you can individually attack there. They are modeling the things that make sense for their problem spaces. I just think that's kind of cool when you think about it. Okay, last example, the Peloponnesian War itself. Now, as I mentioned, Hegemony does the Archidamian War, right, which is, oh gosh, 431 to 421. Roman politics and military in the Republic are my expertise, so I don't actually have the Peloponnesian War memorized. In any event, it is. I think you can play some other versions. I think you can go through to later versions of parts of the war, but we're just going to focus on the first part. Okay, now in Hegemony's Peloponnesian War, you have cities that create units when you click on them with your experimenting deity. Those units can be ordered in battle. You can change their formation size. You can assign their targets. You can, as long as they're not engaged in battle, you can direct them to different spots on the map. Interestingly, when they are in battle, you can't control them anymore, which actually fits quite well with what we know about ancient militaries. They can't be commanded at all, mostly, when they're engaged in actual fighting. So cities are the core. To win the game, you need to take over the target cities of the other side. So those cities are attacked through sieges. Sieges happen when you take your unit and you click on the city, and then they form up around the city and starve it out of food. There's that food again, right? That food that's being modeled by peasants in agriculture. So the Peloponnesian War for Hegemony is a war of units and commanders. There are little commander icons. You can be Alcibiades. Well, you can't be Alcibiades. Let me go back. You can't be Alcibiades, and the reason that's important is it's a real-time strategy. There is an Alcibiades character that you can order to move around, just like you can order the units. And in the early start of the war, there's a Pericles character that you can order around, but you are not Pericles and you are not Alcibiades. You're the Athenian state. Okay, so Athenian state managing these units that have morale levels. They can run away in battle, that have food that needs to be supplied to them, that food needs to be supplied to them from different places like farms. There are mines, and from the mines, material is mined for, I believe it's silver in there. I think it's the silver mines, but I forget. And so it is a game of what we call logistics, right? It's logistics. It's supplying the units and putting them in the places that they need to be. Now, if you go, yeah, that's what the Peloponnesian War was about. Well, depends on who you ask, right? I would agree with you that hegemony is going to appear like a more historically accurate Peloponnesian War, only because we tend to talk about it following Thucydides, right? As units in cities doing sieges, sometimes battles, and so on. And notice too, I didn't mention this, but it also gets the basic military dynamics authentically, not accurately, because there is nothing similar about little digital pixels killing each other, right? There's nothing similar to that in the real world. But they have hoplites that are slow. They have peltasts, light infantry that can throw javelins and run away when the slow hoplites try to get them. They have cavalry that are really good at attacking the sides of the slow hoplites, but will be destroyed if they attack the front. So they're modeling units and command, and they model things in a way that fits reasonably with what we know about conventional military history in the Peloponnesian War. My understanding, because I haven't researched it in a couple of years, my understanding is conventional state-of-the-art 5th century warfare studies really focus on how the hoplites were important, but they were overemphasized by the elite writers who just wanted to make them look like they were really impressive. And that really hoplite phalanxes were formidable, but really easy to defeat if you had light troops and cavalry and things like that. So this game kind of does that, showing those things. Okay, real-time strategy game depicting the Peloponnesian War. Now we're about to have the capstone. When I saw this, because I was looking for an article to write, I wanted to write some more about the Peloponnesian, I wanted to write about games as historical problem spaces. And I was just playing Odyssey because I knew I needed to play it because it's an ancient history game, and I play those so I can talk about them. All right, Cassandra's Peloponnesian War. Let me describe it to you first. It's definitely the Peloponnesian War because it's Athenians and Spartans. And because if you talk to the characters, they're all characters from the first part of the Peloponnesian War, okay? This is how it works. Now, keep in the back of your mind hegemony with units that you see from the outside that you march around, and they have different unit abilities. And that makes sense for a real-time strategy. And it probably would make sense to Thucydides too. Okay, Cassandra's Peloponnesian War starts by looking at the map and seeing which territories that are in the game are loyal to Athens or loyal to Sparta, okay? Now, Cassandra can decide to fight in any of those territories to help out the Athenian or the Spartan cause, okay? And she can choose, and she can go back to an area and change her mind and fight again, okay? So think about it for a second. This is the game saying, Peloponnesian War involved a lot of Spartan and Athenian controlled and influenced areas that might switch hands or might stay under one person's control or so on. And we go, good, right? That is true. That is a true statement, but look at how it happens. So in this case, and I don't think these shots are all from the same one, but let's pretend it's all from Megara. It is Megara, right? Yeah. Okay. So how does she fight Peloponnesian War battles in this game about that period? Well, first, she has to go into Megara. And in Megara, there will be fortresses, and those fortresses will have Spartan warriors in them. Let's assume she's fighting on the Athenian side, for sake of argument. I think she is in this particular case. Now, there, in case you missed this in your Thucydides studies, the Spartans and Athenians weren't building massive stone fortresses across the Aegean to support their armies. They did not have the logistics to do this or the resources to do this. But in each territory that Cassandra wants to fight, here she wants to fight the Spartans, she's got to go into the forts. She goes into the forts as an individual player agent. There is nobody with her. She has no allies. And her job is to murder as many of the high commanding officers of the Spartans in that province. And every province has them. So she, as an individual, is murdering individuals. And when she murders enough individuals, assassinates enough individuals, it's political, right? After she assassinates enough individuals, there is a score called, I believe it's the nation score. And you can see it kind of in the big map I showed you over on the front. When the nation score gets high enough or low enough, honestly, I can't remember and I didn't review. But when it reaches a certain number, then the province can be taken over. So we'll look at this progression. Pick a place on the map, travel to it in first person, maybe fast travel. Climb into the forts. We have a picture here of her dueling in the forts. Sneak and assassinate. If you're like me and you're really bad at the game, you get discovered and you run away really far away. So it all resets. So you can come back in and do it again as an individual. Okay, but here's the cake. Here's the icing. When you have gotten the nation score or the power score to the point you need, you have a battle. Cassandra has a battle. Down at the bottom, that is a picture of an Assassin's Creed Odyssey battle. That does not look like anything in any of our evidence for what a 5th century battle was like. Let's start with the obvious point. There are no units. There are no formations of hoplites. There are no formations of peltasts. There are no cavalry. Instead, there are individuals fighting. Each of those individuals, and the way they do them is the red is the Spartans and the blue is the Athenians. And if you look up top of that screen, the Spartans and Athenians have like a power level. And if the power level goes down too low, they lose. Okay, so Cassandra, who's got that pike there, is in the foreground, goes around and must kill in battle individually as many people as she can on the Spartan side. Now, there are some exceptions. Sometimes some of the Athenian soldiers show up and you're all attacking the same thing. Sometimes not. But notice what's not here. There's no battle line. Okay. And it's probably the case in ancient battle that soldiers weren't as organized as we always think. We make them seem like they were always in perfect squares and column stuff. But if the battle looked like this in the 5th century, something had gone horrifically wrong. You know what this does look like? This looks like Homeric combat. Interesting that in Odyssey, it looks like Homer. Because individuals, she's basically doing, if you remember your Iliad, she's doing, in Greek, it's called an aristeia, right? When Diomedes goes around killing gods and killing humans and nobody can stop him and he's amazing. That's what this is. This is Cassandra's personal playground to go around and kill as many people as spectacularly as possible. If she does it, that territory is won. Think about that for a second. I'm going to go to my next slide to see if I have it there. Nope. So I'm going to say it right here. It is a third-person action-adventure way to solve representing the Peloponnesian War. They didn't say, hey, let's have lots of units. Hey, let's do these other things. They said, the designers, I mean, I didn't ask them, but I'm pretty sure they'd agree. The designers said, we need a good action-adventure, third-person Cassandra, Assassin's Creed version of the Peloponnesian War. How do we do that? How do we do that? And this is what they came up with. They couldn't do it the way that Hegemony does. It would make no sense. Then you're back to the problem of Cassandra as an individual having to run the whole length of the Peloponnesus to be able to order her troops. And then when she wanted to order more troops, she'd have to run to them. And then she'd have to run to other cities, because that's what third-person action adventures are based on, an embodied avatar in the game world. Okay, so these are my questions then. What kind of histories are these games? First of all, I hope that maybe I've shown you a little bit that A, it's really interesting to look at historical games and think about how they're broken down. And B, I'm hoping that historical problem spaces seems to be a good way to look at it. I think it is, because it gets us analyzing the different parts of the game world and how they interact with each other. And those game worlds are always, always, always shaped by genre. So what do we have? In Assassin's Creed Odyssey, we have a game about witnessing the spaces and places of ancient Athens and other places that are represented. We are given the ability to talk to characters, take quests from them, and they're all based on roaming around a three-dimensional world. This is a game that ignores, in many ways, the military aspects, certainly the formal military aspects of the Peloponnesian War, and instead focuses on our hero. Now, here's an interesting question. If you've thought about, we talk sometimes in English between great person history that is focused on individual powerful people, and history of the masses, the everyday people, the commons, people like you and me, depending on how you see that. And in Assassin's Creed Odyssey, is it a great person history, or is it a history of everyday life? Depends. History of everyday life, if you're looking at what are the places people could see, and what did it look like in a marketplace, and how did people interact and stuff like that. Okay, so it's everyday people that way, but I would actually argue the player agent is a great person. She single-handedly controls the narrative. She can talk with the mighty. She ends conspiracies, and she's the son of a king, or sorry, daughter of a king. And so it's an interesting mix. It's an interesting mix between a great person and maybe a social history approach. But at the end of the day, the social history is mostly representational. And that's not an insult. That is not meant to be an insult to Assassin's Creed. They're trying to say this is what the world is like for a witness. They even have gameplay features that encourage you to witness. You get more points if you go to new places. So this is a game about an individual hero witnessing the span of material culture as she heroically kind of goes through and focuses mostly interaction choices on interpersonal violence and athletic gymnastic navigation. Hegemony is the administrator's war. The hegemony is a state history, right? Hegemony is not really interested in the individual experiences of the individual soldier. Hegemony is interested in units and where they go. Old military history, 30, 40 years ago, used to focus a lot on units and assume that units always did what their generals commanded them to. And that no one studies that way anymore that I'm aware of. Hegemony gives you maybe a new military history because there's morale and there's logistics, and it's focusing on these different units fighting. But at the end of the day, it's still from the perspective of the one commanding and controlling. And so it very much is a great person history, but also a logistical history at the same time. And I think using a historical problem space can help you approach those, because you're able to say, we often, when we look at historical video games, take one part of the game and say, why is it like that? Why is Cassandra an assassin with incredible powers? And we ask that question as if the choice of making Cassandra an assassin is independent. It's on its own. There's no other factors to consider. That's wrong. In fact, the decision to make her that third-person assassin is connected to every other decision they made in the game. Logistics and supply and representation. And in Hegemony, it's the same way. So a historical problem space approach can't necessarily tell you why they did something perfectly, right? But it can start to suggest that some design solutions made more sense if you picked this kind of game than other design solutions. And so that's kind of my final thoughts. I think the idea that history is something we select and we filter and we share, I think is really important. It's important for looking at film history and, your grandparents telling you stories and video games and documentaries and pictures. They're all selections. They are not the past. The past is past. And so this is one way of looking at these things. And, I encourage you to think that these designers are very much what Adam Chapman once called designer historians or developer historians. They're trying to make a world of evidence they've selected come into reality, but they're always doing it with the goals in mind of being game designers and designing games of a particular medium. Thank you very much. That's my talk. And if you happen to have any questions, I would love to answer them.
Thank you, Jeremiah.
My pleasure.
Yeah, I guess it is difficult to see, but here we sit in darkness. Here are about seven people of us here in this room, and we turned off the lights only in order to see the screen projected on the wall where the presentation. So that's why we are in the darkness, just in case you're wondering.
Yeah, it's not sunset yet, I don't think.
And guys, do you have any questions?
And I'm not offended if you don't. It's okay.
I guess maybe some people. Mikhail, just go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you for the lecture. It's kind of interesting thing that now you just play historical games, and now I would think all the time when I'm playing, what is the methodics, let's say. And my comments is that maybe that this particular part of Odyssey of Assassin's Creed is not very different from the previous parts, because I played in previous parts. It was like about medieval Italy or American Revolution, and I see basically the same gameplay. So maybe what's specifically, let's say, differs differs this part from the previous one. So what is specifically antique, let's say?
Yes, that's a great question. That's exactly what I was referring to when I talked about a brand genre, right? Companies come up, or design studios come up with these ways of doing things, just like Ubisoft has. At the time I was writing this, so last year, I think, Ubisoft had a new announcement because Mirage was coming out. It hadn't come out yet. And I thought it was fascinating because the person who was representing Ubisoft said there are 3 pillars of Assassin's Creed: stealth, parkour, and combat. And you can't get better than that. The company itself, right, has said these are the things that make Assassin's Creed. And so those are the parts that always stay. And I'm glad you said that, because I am a amateur game designer. Educational game designer. I design board games for my students. And so I know about game design pretty well, and I've listened to game designers and talked with them and read what they write. I am 100% confident that when they sat down to do Assassin's Creed Mirage, the latest one, they didn't even ask, how do we make this an Assassin's Creed game? They might have asked that. They just started doing it because they knew that fighting and stealth and parkour, gymnastics, were the things that made Assassin's Creed games Assassin's Creed. And sometimes I think people talk about it. Sometimes I think they actually say. So let me give you a point on Hegemony. Hegemony used to be turn-based with little units that you'd move and click the end turn button. But then it turned into real time. So that's our evidence that designers do say, oh, I want to design it this way. Oh, wait, now I'm going to design it according to a different game. So I think you said it, right? Whether it's medieval Venice or Alexandria or colonial Boston and New York, right? An Assassin's Creed game is going to have you sneaking and killing and assassinating and doing gymnastics. The one thing that they didn't say at Ubisoft, which I think is also a core part of the brand, is the witnessing, right? When you play an Assassin's Creed game, you expect to see something that may not be realistic, but it sure does look realistic. And that's what you expect. I think I am not familiar enough with all the other Assassin's Creeds. Quite honestly, I play them for a while and I get very excited. And then I say, I don't have 70 hours in my life to keep doing this. I have to go on and do something else. But the thing in looking back that they seem to have done differently was that ability to actually kill people who were bystanders. And I don't know. I assume the developers were saying, we want you to have freedom. We want you to go anywhere you want, do anything you want. But in the end, well, again, is it horrible? They did make it so that if you tried to harm somebody, they are in distress. They're crying out. They're saying, please don't hit me. So I'm glad they did that, right? I'm glad that they didn't design people as simply being struck dead with no consequence. But at the same time, it's a choice they themselves didn't make in other examples. And I think you could make a good case that you shouldn't be encouraging people to harm innocent people. So anyways, I think that's the big difference. But I think you're right. I think they all focus around those three pillars. And I think all the future ones will too. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Great, thanks.
Thank you. There is one more question from the audience.
Yes, it
Great.
is a little comment. I want to defend this game, Assassin's Creed era at all, because Mikhail said it's all the same. But I played only in two parts of Assassin's Creed, Valhalla and
Odyssey.
Odyssey, yes, Odyssey. And I saw one important thing. In both of these parts, you have a unique mechanic of swimming. For example, in Valhalla, you can swim by the river and rob different villages. It is more like a lifestyle of Viking. In Odyssey, you can swim around all Greece. You can use different marshruts, different ways. And for example, when I played in Odyssey, I made a cabotage swim around all of Peloponnese, and it was a great experience. Seriously, I was not really excited in the plot of this game, but I'm really thankful for these feelings. Cabotage swimming around the old Peloponnese was the best part of this game.
That's a wonderful comment, and it fits, right? Did they discuss the tragedies of being a warrior in these times? No. Did they make it so you could swim around and see everything? Yes. Yeah, exactly, right? Assassin's Creed That's amazing, though. What a great comment. Assassin's Creed bases its money, right, on pay me and you will get to be living in this world. Absolutely. And you could imagine, sorry, I know it was just a good comment, but to turn it back to my master plan, right? You wouldn't probably need your units in the real-time strategy game to swim through the ocean. That probably wouldn't do very much. But for you, in the third-person adventure, it was a joyful experience. That's great. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe there are other questions. Okay, while people while people need to come up with other questions, I have one. So you mentioned this concept, like first thing to mention this Adam Chapman book, which is quite an it makes quite an interesting distinction between different sort of games and how different genres deliver different sort of experience. And of course, one of the cornerstones of researching historical games, it's apart from sort of things that we see and hear in the games, there is also like this very gameplay, what you can do, like your functions. And right. there is an interesting concept, procedural rhetoric, which like, everything is about like how the game can, what it can teach us or explain or debate about a particular aspect of the past via the gameplay. So you do something, you get some consequences, and therefore, like you learn that this is how things functioned in the past because, like, you witnessed that.
Right.
Previous year, I made a lecture where at which I made a case about another game, or another Hegemony game, which is, I believe, part 2, where it is about Italy and like Rome facing Pyrrhus, I guess, or maybe earlier periods. I don't remember. And I made a case that it is interesting, like this game has interesting procedural rhetoric in its own way, because it explains how, like, let's imagine you're Rome and you conquer like neighboring city because it feels hostile to you for some reason.
Sure.
And you conquer it, and then you discover that your logistics and supplying that city where you put your outpost, it is now threatened by another, I don't know, tribe or city or something, and you feel compelled conquer it as well, just because of the logistics. It's not because you're hubris or, I don't know, it's the game tells you to conquer it. It's like you sort of feel uncomfortable when your logistic is threatened, and so you conquer more and more and more and more just because of the logistics. You want to feel secure. And maybe you have, I don't know, other aspects of similar kind, how gameplay in Assassin's Creed maybe, or Hegemony also can deliver these interesting points via just game mechanics.
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. Yes, Ian Bogost's procedural rhetoric, very, very important. You know, if you want a long read, everybody, you can find the article that this is based on online. It's with Histories, where I go into those and cite all the people who've done this work. A couple of things. I think so. Adam Chapman's distinction between conceptual and realist simulations, I think, is one of the most important pieces of argument that I've experienced in my work, because I use it all the time. I've adopted a slightly different approach. I actually think, for my purposes, talking about historical problem spaces, it's equally as important to say, is the player agent embodied? That's the word I used, right? Has an avatar, or is the player agent unembodied? They have no avatar. And so we saw that, right? We saw how that ends up with very different histories in Assassin's Creed and Hegemony, whether they do those things. So I think that becomes an important part of all this procedural rhetoric. I think I'm addressing your question by going this way. It's easy to look at games and talk about representation versus simulation. And Cameron Kunzelman, I don't know if you've ever listened to Game Design Study Buddies or Game Study Buddies. It's a podcast.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, and he said something once that I thought was really interesting, where it was that game studies folks seem to think representation is less valid than simulation. I'm not sure that it is, but I will say this. If you're going to learn about a system, having a system simulated is probably a good idea because you can learn from analogy. You can learn from saying, oh, here's how the little working parts work here. This is how it fits in the big world. So they are different. Even if one's not better than the other, they are different. So, but at the same time, Assassin's Creed has a lot of procedural rhetoric, but the procedural rhetoric focuses wholly on what would it be like for a body in space in this culture to navigate, to go around this culture. And so there's a lot of stuff. I mean, some of it, so a lot of it's sort of cinematic, right? I mean, a lot of the arguments in an Assassin's Creed or a Red Dead Redemption are based in the cutscenes and the dialogue scenes. So as far as how documentable aspects of history, like people and narratives and things, you're only going to get parts of that in the cutscenes and the dialogue scenes in Assassin's Creed. Otherwise, when it comes to actual gameplay mechanics, the big argument is you're witnessing, this is how you'd witness it. And I can't help but think we all walk away from Assassin's Creed Odyssey either going, wow, that looked amazing, or, that looked amazing, I wonder if it was like that. But it's always going to focus on, wow, that was amazing looking, like our friend who swam around the Peloponnesus. I mean, like, wow, that was amazing. And what you're mentioning about the other one, I have that game. I've never played it in full. It's Caesar and the Gallic War. It's the war against the Gauls. That's actually illustrating a couple of things. One, you've got a brand genre right there. Hegemony isn't as old as Assassin's Creed, so they don't have lots of versions of the game. But that logistical argument is absolutely in the first game, which is about Philip of Macedon. It's about the second game, which is based on that, but adds the Greeks. And it's in the third game. Presumably, you walk away from Hegemony thinking about logistics in the real world. I would ask, because I'm a teacher, fundamentally, I would ask that you say, well, is this really how it was? And what's the evidence like? But they've clearly put you in a focus on different things. And they're explaining different things. Logistically, this is why some actions were more allowable than others. Navigationally, physically, this is why some places to visit were different than others. In the end, games are mostly about agents in systems. And so they're going to advance some kind of procedural rhetorical argument about agents and systems. It just happens to be a rhetoric of geography. No, it's a rhetoric of personally navigating the geography, because Hegemony has a rhetoric of geography too. Hills disorganize you and trees break you up and you need fields and stuff. It's just a different rhetoric of geography. It's a great question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And do we have any questions? Okay, so just a couple more minutes. So I believe I mentioned that already, but for those who don't know, Jeremiah published a book called Game in the Past, Using Video Games to Teach Secondary History. I believe this second edition was published in 2022.
Yep.
And Jeremiah, you mentioned to me that you were working on your next book. Could you please share a couple of words about it?
Sure. So most of my work in historical game studies came through education as an angle. My works that focus most on games as historical problem spaces tend to be my articles. But Gaming the Past, the new one that I wrote, or the second edition, I'm really excited about because it goes through and explains historical problem spaces. So if you can get a look at it at some point, anybody who's interested in this, that's where you'll find sort of the latest. What I have found over time is that some historical game developers, most often academics who are designing games for various reasons, have found the historical problem space framework is really helpful when you're designing a game. And it makes sense because what I'm saying with the historical problem space framework is every history game does this, okay? You can make a game call it about history, and make a blue background with a little dot in the center, and you move the dot around, and that's all that happens, and you can say that's a history game, but most people aren't going to call that a history game. If they're going to make one that seems to fit what we call this, it's going to have a world with player agents doing these things. So that can help you design and think about the different parts. So my latest book, the one that hopefully will come out next year, I'm finishing up the manuscript now, is a book for teachers of history, for how they can make board games and choose your own adventure, digital text games for their classes, but then also how they can get their students to design board games and interactive text games that they've researched as part of a history class. So it's focusing on how do you design historical games and research them using the historical problem space. And then there's a lot of discussion in there about if you're a teacher, not only how would you design them, but how can you get your students to design them? Because that's really exciting. I have been doing student design projects in my high school classes for a decade or more. And it is amazing the research and care and energy and effort in doing history that students have when they get to make their own historical game. So that's what the next book is about. And I'm really excited about that. Someday I may write a book about historical problem spaces, but I've promised to give myself a break after this next one. So we'll see what happens.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for delivering this really, really cool and insightful lecture. And have a nice day.
Thank you. It was absolutely my pleasure. Be safe out there, my friends, and have a great day.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.